right, good morning, everybody. Today is Friday. Yay! May 29, 2015. And this is Before the First Cup with Jules here on UCY.TV. Happy Friday, everybody. We made it again. It is 68 degrees and sunny here in upstate New York, so it actually looks like it's going to be a nice weekend. This is the official planting weekend in the Northeast, the weekend after Memorial Day when, knock on wood, we don't get any more frost, let's hope. So I have a couple special treats for you guys today. We have Mr. Brandon Turbeville is going to be joining us in hour number 1 today. And yes, the show is going to run 2 hours, special treat, because hour number 2 will be an interview that I did with April Boden from Truth or Talk Radio yesterday afternoon in regards to her thoughts with vaccines, anthrax, missing bioterror agents being shipped on commercial transport. So we'll play that in hour 2 and give some commentary. But right now, Mr. Turbeville's on with us. Hey, Brandon, how you doing?
Hey, Jules. I'm doing okay. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I really enjoy you not working Friday and being able to join me. It's quite a treat. Now, you also are doing a mainstream interview this afternoon, are you not?
Yeah, 3 o'clock this afternoon, 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I will be on the Kate Daly Show, which is a Fox affiliate program out of Utah. I've been on there before. They're good hosts, and but this is indeed mainstream. This is a Fox affiliate out in Utah, and it, of course, is bigger than Utah. But yeah, we're going to be talking about ISIS. We're going to be talking about the Middle East in general, some geopolitics and stuff like that.
Oh, that's great. And is there a place where we can listen to that while it's live? I don't remember if there was a stream or not.
There's a stream, and I guess people would just have to Google it. I didn't have it handy, but you could probably Google Kate Daly, and I can't remember the name of the show right offhand. I wasn't prepared to plug it. I can get it, but
yeah, I'll find it. I'll find it while you're on, because you did an interview with them last year, I believe, correct?
Yeah, and we talked about the same subject matter, and it was a good show, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of that information out there again. Especially the show is kind of sandwiched in between traditional, Republican style radio, the kind of Sean Hannity stuff a lot. So this is a breath of fresh air that it's on there, and so we're going to hopefully get some information out.
Yeah, they were really good, actually. I enjoyed them as hosts. They asked really good questions, so this should be another treat, right?
Should be. I hope it is.
So what is on the agenda today? I know you said you had a bunch of things you wanted to talk about and get us up to date on.
Yeah, it's called Perspectives with Kate Daly. It's KZNU in Utah. It's the Fox affiliate.
Okay, I'll see if I can find Chad a link for that for later.
And before we get into what I was going to bring up, I should ask you, with the news coming out yesterday, are you ready to drop your show and drop UCY and go work for the George Pataki campaign?
Oh, God, I saw that. I mean, have you, well, I sent you the list of pictures of all the now potential GOP candidates, and we forgot to add Pataki and Santorum were both missing from that. But what a gaggle of goofs in there. Hey, Trump, yeah, did you even know Trump had thrown his hat in? I didn't know Trump had officially said he was running.
I didn't know that he officially announced. I thought that he was still just talking about it. I didn't know that he had officially announced. I don't know how anybody could take these people seriously, but
yeah, I don't know.
Lindsey Graham, unfortunately, he's running for president. He's going to announce on June the 1st, from what I understand. He's going to announce his presidential campaign. And again, I must apologize to the world for the fact that my state has produced this piece of human trash in the U.S. Senate, and he's now going to run for president. He won't win, but he's there, and I apologize for that. It had nothing to do with it.
Well, we forgive you. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you too before we get into the Middle East and the main topics you want to discuss today, I'm sure you've been watching the filibuster that happened before Memorial Day. I believe it was Rand Paul. It was filibustering the NDAA being, was it the NDAA? Yeah.
Patriot Act, I believe.
Patriot Act, yeah, being signed back again to renew it. They went on vacation, leaving it as a dangling thread that wasn't tied up. And I believe they come back from vacation on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, the 31st. And the deadline to vote yes on the Patriot Act is the next day, Monday. And if they don't vote that through, does it not get renewed?
I think that's how it's supposed to happen. If they don't vote it through, it's supposed to not be renewed. Of course, the downside of that is, I mean, obviously we support not renewing it, but there's been so many laws passed since then that, you know, at this point, this is just a very tiny, small step in the right direction. You know, with different NDAA bills, different you know, commissions acts and that sort of thing that have taken place afterwards. I don't know how much effect this would even have, but of course we support not renewing it and and actually passing laws that state the opposite of what the Patriot Act has done. So
Right. I mean, the Patriot Act pretty much just laid the groundwork for all the other dystopian things that happened after that.
yeah, and you know, I mean, it itself was just one bill out of many. Bill Clinton passed one that was very similar back when he was president. So after Oklahoma City. So this is just a long line of bills. The Patriot Act's the most popular one, the most well known. And I don't like Rand Paul at all, but you know, I will congratulate him for the filibuster, I guess we should say.
And I mean, that's kind of what he's been hanging his hat on. You know, is he filibustered the drones too, didn't he?
Yeah, and then he came out and said he supported them being used on American citizens without charge or trial. So that tells you about Rand Paul.
Right, exactly. But
And he
he's
wants,
smiling.
yeah, yeah, he wants Edward Snowden thrown into prison. He says that he should be put into prison for, and I don't even like Edward Snowden, but he says that Snowden should be put into prison for blowing the whistle on massive surveillance. And so that should tell you about where Rand Paul lies.
Right, right. So, okay, I don't want to deal with daily U.S. garbage politics right now. Let's talk about something more exciting.
Okay, well, we recently had some documents released. Judicial Watch had been trying to get a hold of some documents related to the Benghazi scandal, and they were getting stonewalled by the Department of Defense and a few other departments in the State Department and that sort of thing. And they finally got the documents released after a lawsuit was filed, and they were released on May 18th, or at least they were published on May 18th by Judicial Watch. And these documents have a lot of details regarding Benghazi and what was happening there. And of course, that's what the mainstream press is focused on, especially the Republican crowds, the Fox News crowd and that sort of thing, have been focusing on the Benghazi issue. And that is an important issue, no doubt. It's very important. But what they had absolutely no coverage on whatsoever were 7 pages that were included in that document tranche, and that is documents that came from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And Defense Intelligence Agency is part, of course, of the Department of Defense. They come up with policy. They come up with research related to policies created by the Department of Defense. And these documents they go back to 2012, and what they do is that they essentially admit that, well, they don't essentially admit it, they do admit that the United States was knowingly supporting Al-Qaeda and what was going to become ISIS in their fight against Assad. They admit that the United States wanted to see a terrorist Islamic state set up in between Syria and Iraq, and this is in pretty clear language. This is not something you have to read in between the lines to see. It's right there. And again, this came from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've done an article on it. It's up on my website. And you can actually click on the link and it'll take you to the PDF of the documents. They're heavily redacted, but the stuff that was not redacted is pretty it's a bombshell release. And again, we have to remember that not only do we have the Western press telling you that there's a terrorist under every bed. ISIS is coming to get you. ISIS is this organic resistance group that appeared in Syria and Iraq, and that they, just somehow managed to outsmart yet again the most advanced military in the world and the most advanced intelligence agencies in the world, when all they had to do was watch Iraqi television and see the fact that there were convoys of pickup trucks and Humvees coming across the Iraqi desert to take over territory. So we have the Western mainstream press saying that, but we also have these independent, so-called independent reporters and figures like Noam Chomsky. We'll call him Gnome Chomsky, right? Because he comes out and says, "Oh, well, I don't believe in any conspiracy." I mean, to his credit, he has opposed military action, but he still comes out and says, "Oh, anybody who says that ISIS is being supported by the U.S. government, that's a conspiracy theory, and that's not true." Well, GNOME has been shown to be nothing more than a gatekeeper yet again, because these documents prove GNOME wrong. And if you look at these documents, one of the first things they do is they mention that, and this is again back in 2012, that they say the Salafist Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. Okay, well, some of us were saying that in 2011, and we're called conspiracy theorists. Now that we see that the Defense Intelligence Agency knew, and were well aware of the fact that it was the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda who were the insurgency in Syria. And they say directly after that the West and Gulf countries and Turkey support the opposition. In other words, Al Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, Salafists, Al Nusra, all this stuff. They say that the West is supporting these groups. And it mentions also that Al Qaeda in Iraq was involved with the Syrian opposition from the beginning. Of course, we knew that. That was, they weren't just supporting the opposition, they were the opposition essentially, but with the Muslim Brotherhood and some other Salafists and Wahhabis. But to continue on, that they have documents here, that these documents also mention that there were the opposition forces, the death squads, were trying to control eastern areas of Syria and western areas of Iraq, and in addition to areas that are on the Turkish-Syria border. And it says, and this is a direct quote, Western countries, the Gulf states, and Turkey are supporting these efforts. That's a direct quote. They even mention the plan in this document to create safe havens, and this is what I referred to as buffer zones and no-fly zones. They called this a safe zone about a year ago that they were planning to implement over Syria. And in the document, they even say that this is something that's going to help prepare safe havens for international sheltering, and that it would be similar to what happened in Libya when they implemented safe zones and buffer zones and no-fly zones in Libya. And we can all see how that turned out and what the result of that was. Now, just to point out to people, you don't have to look very far to see that if the U.S. is supporting the opposition, and the opposition is Al Qaeda and Al Nusra and ISIS and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Wahhabis, then the U.S. is obviously supporting all of those people. That's pretty clear. The document makes that very clear, as a matter of fact. So one other thing that they mention in the documents, they say, is if this situation, as it continues to develop, that there's a possibility of establishing what they refer to as a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and they refer to the areas of Hasaka and Deir el-Sur. And this is they say this is exactly what the supporting powers, meaning the United States, NATO, essentially, exactly what they want, because they want to isolate the Syrian regime, and they want to eliminate, again, the strategic depth of the Shia expansion. And so there's a number of things here to bring out. The idea of creating a Salafist principality in eastern Syria and western Iraq has been done. And what is it? It's the Islamic State. So these documents are admitting that what the West wants is a terrorist Islamic State in eastern Syria, western Iraq, and that's exactly what has happened and it's called ISIS. But yet we're being told that ISIS was an organic group that was not funded by the West, that it was just a resistance to Assad and Maliki in Iraq, and that we should be afraid that they're going to come over here and blow up buildings and have shootouts and all that kind of thing. So um, that's pretty important. Again, this is direct admission that the U.S. has been supporting ISIS and what it's trying to do. So the Islamic State is entirely a Western creation, and this you can see that through these documents. So then you have the other question of why they're doing this, and this one of them was to isolate the Syrian regime. Well, that's clear enough. That we don't really even need to go into that so much. But the other issue was the strategic depth of the Shia expansion. Now, the Shia expansion is basically what we've talked about here before, which is the arc of influence that has been held by Iran, right? This is sort of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Hezbollah, and Lebanon. This is the Shia expansion that they refer to. Is really just Iran's arc of influence. So what they're trying to do is to create a Sunni buffer with Iraq and Syria and the Islamic State, or not even really a Sunni buffer, but more of a Wahhabist buffer. They're also trying to destabilize the Syrian government proper and the Iraqi government proper and break the ties that those governments have to Iran. They're trying to do the same thing with Hezbollah as well. So again, all of this stuff was admitted by Defense Intelligence Agency documents. It's out there. All you have to do is pull it up. I got the link in my article. It's free. And have you heard that on CNN? Have you heard that on Fox? Of course not. If you've heard anything about these documents, it's been Benghazi, and that's one can see why you're not going to hear many reports about these documents.
Yeah, I just found your story and I linked it up in chat for everyone. So interesting that Turkey has been implicated in these documents because they've been kind of playing it cool that they really didn't have anything to do with ISIS.
Yeah, and that might fly for people who watch, again, CNN, Fox News, who watch television news. That might fly with that because you're getting the opposite of the story if you're getting any story. But Turkey has been playing a major role in the destabilization against Syria. All you have to do is look at the map, and you'll get to see where the terrorists are, essentially what the Islamic State looks like. If you have Syria and Iraq on a map together, and you color it in with red or something, and say this is where the Islamic State controls territory, what you'll see is that there's a direct supply line coming in from Turkey. There's two major supply lines. One of them was around Kobani or Ain al-Arab. But these major supply lines are coming in from Turkey into Syria and then into Iraq. Turkey has been supporting the terrorists. They've been funding the terrorists, well, and especially arming and facilitating the terrorists into Syria since the beginning of the destabilization. They've been one of the major players in this situation. So Turkey might want to play it cool on the international stage, but to anybody who's been following this, you can see that Turkey is one of the major players in the funding of terrorism. I mean, in the facilitation of terrorism.
And I believe at one point there were some official stories that came out talking about the CIA training the rebels, quote unquote rebels, that became ISIS or ISIL, Daesh, whatever their name is now, in Turkey, right? And then they were sending them back over the border.
They were trained in Jordan, but they were brought to Turkey, and then they came in from Turkey into Syria. And they did that with Israeli air cover, by the way. So that tells you the international dimension. They were trained by the U.S. It came out from Der Spiegel first, and a couple of other European news organizations. Didn't really come out over here, but there were tens of thousands of these guys being trained in Jordan, and then all of a sudden we see ISIS as soon as they start crossing the border from Turkey. But yeah, it's well known that Turkey has provided air cover for the terrorists on a number of occasions. We had this question of the tomb of Suleiman Shah, where the Turks have invaded Syria with ground troops and with air power. At the same time, as Syrian soldiers were forced to try to respond to that, there were death squads coming in other locations. So it was sort of a decoy move. The Turks have provided air cover on a number of other occasions against the Syrian military, I guess we should say. So the death squads could get a bigger foothold in the country, or to move from one town to the other, to one strategic location to the other. So Turkey has been, again, I can't stress this enough, has been outside of the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. It would be Turkey who is number three in terms of facilitation of terrorism.
Yeah, I just did a quick search on Turkey and weapons because I thought I had seen a story a couple weeks ago where now they were. I don't know if we were selling them weapons or giving them more weapons, but in the beginning, when this all started, when we go back to Libya and Benghazi, Turkey was very instrumental in the flow of weapons, if I remember that correctly, right? They ended up passing out of Libya with Stevens and ended up in Turkey, where then they were in the hands of these radicals that they were arming to go, into Syria. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, and Turkey has made official pronouncements that are supporting the opposition in Syria as well. So this is nothing new, really. And again, notice that there's this question. We talked about this before, but there's been reports to expect a possible military invasion of Syria within the next month. Right? At first, it was in the next. When I did the report, it was in the next few days to the end of June is when we have to be concerned about this the most. But the idea was that Turkey has recently signed an agreement with Qatar, and they've signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia. And the idea is that the three countries were going to try and invade Syria at some point because it involves greater military cooperation, greater intelligence sharing, and even some Turkish politicians were concerned that this would mean a direct military invasion, Turkish invasion of Syria with ground troops involved, all kinds of occupations and all that kind of stuff going on. So they're concerned about it in the Turkish parliament. And so this has happened just recently after the Saudi bombing of Yemen. So a lot of people there are concerned that we're going to see a direct military confrontation, not just the occasional skirmish or bombing or air cover for terrorists, but a direct military kind of conquest on the part of Turkey. So they're certainly not just laying back and just allowing terrorists to come across the borders. They've been heavily implicated. I mean, Turkish intelligence agencies have been caught and killed in Syria by the Syrian military. So, this is not just that they're funding terrorists and then sending them on their merry way when they get across the border. They've been heavily involved in directing these guys and assisting them even inside of Syria.
So, what is going on in Yemen right now? I haven't seen any news on that in the last week or so, I don't think. Is Saudi still bombing there?
They're still bombing. There's this about 5 days of no fighting because they were attempting to allow in humanitarian aid to the Yemeni people. The Saudis agreed to peace talks, but they wanted the peace talks held in Saudi Arabia, and then there's the question of a power-sharing government, and nobody really wants to have a power-sharing government, so now we're back to square one. The Saudis are bombing, and the fighting continues.
Wow. What a mess. So what now in Syria, has we officially have boots on the ground?
We do, because we have this question of now the overall operation is certainly open to question, but the U.S. in I think it was May 17th, something around that time, the U.S. announced that it had killed Abu Sayyaf. They had killed Sayyaf in Deir el-Sur, and it was a special operations operation, and they had killed Sayyaf. They had captured his wife and were taking her for interrogation. And this idea, the U.S. has officially admitted then if special operations are operating inside of Syria, then obviously boots on the ground, right? But there's a question about the operation, because the Syrian military, prior to the American announcement, had reported that they had killed an ISIS oil minister right, and 40 ISIS fighters in the same location. And they gave a different name. They said they had killed Abu al-Taim al-Saudi, and that he was the ISIS oil minister, right? They're saying Abu Sayyaf was the U.S. is saying Abu Sayyaf was the oil minister, but this wouldn't be the first time the U.S. took credit for something that the Syrian military or the Iraqi military has done. They've done this several times in the past. And this Abu Sayyaf, I mean, we don't really know who he is. This could be an American creation in the Hollywood realm, or this could be a real person. We just don't know. But it's awful funny that the Syrian military would announce the killing of an ISIS oil minister in the same location hours before the U.S. would then say that they killed an ISIS oil minister in the same location. So it seems like there's a little bit of piggybacking. But regardless, it's an admission that American special forces are on the ground, right? We know French special forces have been on the ground and intelligence officers has been on the ground, because early on in the destabilization, the Syrian military captured 13 of them and then turned them over to back to France after they were captured. So we know this is going on. We've had suspicions and no proof really that special forces have been operating inside Syria for some time, but this is really an open admission by the U.S. military that they are indeed operating there.
Wow.
But
So
remember, Obama promised that we wouldn't have boots on the ground, so I imagine that this is all a big lie and there aren't any soldiers.
right, right. Just like we weren't going to put boots back on the ground in Iraq either.
Yeah, well, I guess we really couldn't put them back on the ground in Iraq if we never took them out to begin with. So I guess
Right.
we could give them that one. It's on technicality.
Right, right. So what do you think is the next chessboard move here with Syria?
Well, I think you're going to see more of the same. The rebels right now are bearing down upon Latakia, and this is, and I call them rebels. The terrorists are bearing down on Latakia, and this is an area that's seen fighting in the past, but it's compared to some of the areas in eastern Syria, compared to maybe Aleppo. It hasn't seen as much fighting. It's still an absolute hell, but it's not, it's not what happened in Aleppo necessarily, from what I understand. So they are now gathering on. It's a port city too, essentially, and they're gathering to engage in some type of offensive there. And I think what we're going to see is an intensification of the proxy war. For one thing, the Syrian military has unfortunately hit a brick wall recently, and the reason that is because there's been a major push, a major reinforcement of terrorists on the part of the NATO alliance, and I think we're going to see an even greater push here in the near future. And of course, you're seeing in the media this propaganda blitz saying that Assad is finished, he's losing his grip on power. You remember, I think we talked about this on your show. There was this report of his and his special intelligence bureau that they reported that he was part of a coup, but it wasn't true. So all this is ideas to put out this sense of inevitability that the Syrian regime is about to fall, right? So this is part of a propaganda blitz to break the will of the Syrian people at home and abroad. And they're also, I think, planning for the possibility of some type of direct military confrontation. If the major push in the next few weeks or month doesn't work, I think we can look for some type of U.S. NATO military invasion like Libya, where there is this buffer zone or safe zone, or we could see a Turkish assertion. We could see a Saudi bombing campaign. The Israelis, are always willing to provoke something. So I think that's a possibility. Now, I'm not trying to make a prediction here. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that I think this is going to happen in the next month, but what I'm saying is that this is a distinct possibility, and we've seen similar situations before, and we can see that there's this gear up for a greater push of proxy forces, and also this backup option of regional military action, or even international NATO-style military action.
Now, if they are successful in taking out Assad, any idea as to who the Western powers have in mind to put in place of him as the Western puppet government?
There's a number of these little traitors and so forth that are hanging out in hotels. The Syrian National Coalition members. There's a number of people who are sort of in England or in United Arab Emirates or some place like that who are hanging out all across the world, just waiting like vultures to take over the place of the Assad government. It's not really sure exactly who the individual would be yet because there's been a number of them. But there's plenty of people to choose from.
Have you had any contact recently with your friend in Syria? Because I saw a few days ago there were reports about some mass civilian deaths caused by quote unquote jihadis. A few hundred civilians here and there. I was just thinking about your friend. I thought, man, I hope she's okay.
Yeah, she just made a media appearance, so on Al Ataja,
Oh, good.
Lebanese TV. So her video is up there, and yeah, the hundreds of civilians that are killed. I mean, unfortunately, this is nothing new in Syria, right? We were up to 310,000 people killed, and some by crossfire in war, but most by the terrorists backed by NATO. So. This is about the average number of people killed every day, I would imagine. And I should also mention too, before I forget, we recently had this interview with the Al Nusra terrorist that was the news the other day. I think maybe people might have heard some of this. If we can talk about that for a second, there's
Sure.
this guy, the alleged leader of Al-Nusra Front, this Abu Muhammad al-Julani, right? He recently appeared on Al Jazeera, and it was all over the Western press for a while, right? And he's in this room that it looks like a palace. So go figure where that's at. It also he says he's fearless, but he's wearing a hijab and he's got his back turned to the camera. So this is a fearless Jelani, and he says to the interviewer again, Al Jazeera, and for anybody out there who thinks that they're getting real news because they watch Al Jazeera, this organization is funded by Qatar. This place is a feudal monarchy. These people fund terrorism. These people are part of the GCC. They are NATO satellites and NATO puppets. So don't think you're getting any news from Al Jazeera. In fact, the guy that interviewed Jelani was a journalist who had been convicted of supporting Al Qaeda. Right. So this is highly questionable. So when you look at this, first you got to wonder: does Jelani even exist as a person, or is he a fictional character? And if he does, is this really Jelani? And what is this, right? So he basically says that the only true thing he says, I guess I should say, is that Khorasan was a invented group. He says that the Americans invented this Khorasan group, and it doesn't exist to destroy America. Well, all right, fine. It doesn't exist at all. The U.S. just created that name. But then he goes on into this other spiel, and he starts saying that they're on a mission, and the only mission is to fight the Syrian regime. So he tells the U.S. basically, we have no plans to attack the U.S. We have no plans to attack Europe. That would hurt our mission to destroy the Syrian regime. We're interested in fighting the Syrian regime. And he says, maybe Al Qaeda is interested in bombing America, but not us. All right, so there's a lot of problems with this. People need to know Al Nusra is Al Qaeda. All right, so to try to separate and say Al Qaeda wants to do this, but Al Nusra doesn't, forget all that stuff. It's the same organization. Al Nusra was the Syrian version of Al Qaeda, and that's that. So this is all propaganda to begin with. But what he's saying here is essentially look, we're not that bad. You don't have anything to worry about us. We're just trying to destroy Assad. So you wonder, that's another indication that you're going to get a big terrorist push into Syria, because we have to soften up Western audiences to realize that this isn't really that bad. This really isn't that big of a deal. They just want to attack Syria. They don't necessarily want to attack us. So don't get too upset about it. And then we've also got this claim that Giuliani says that they wouldn't kill Christians or Druze or even the Alawites whenever they took over these areas if they would just refuse to fight ISIS, if they would just refuse to support Assad, if they would reject Assad, and of course give up their religious beliefs and convert to Sunni Islam. And of course, these are the groups that were screaming Christians to Beirut, Alawites to the grave back when this thing first started. So all of this, I would suggest, is entirely propaganda, right? And this guy is a trained monkey. That's all he's doing is and so he fits in really well with the American press and the Saudi and Qatari press because they're all trained monkeys and actors, right? So I would say don't take this seriously, but realize what it represents, which is a media campaign to convince people that for the time being, ISIS, or especially specifically al-Nusra, isn't that bad. They just want to destroy Assad, and that's sort of the propaganda narrative there. Now, remember, you still have to fear them. You still have to fear ISIS, and you still have to fear Al Qaeda because there's a couple of civil liberties that haven't quite been slaughtered yet in the U.S., and we have to be scared of these terrorist groups in order to destroy these civil liberties, and that's coming too. There's an awful lot of propaganda surrounding that as well domestically. So this was the big story for about, I don't know, 8 hours. This Giuliani interview. So just to put some clarification on that.
Now, what about the ISIS CFO? We talked about that last Friday, I believe. The one that was supposedly killed. We found him in Syria and killed him.
The ISIS CEO is Baghdadi.
Oh, is that who that was? Wait a minute. Let me.
Are you talking about the oil minister or the leader?
There was some raid that happened in Syria last week, I believe, and they said that he was the ISIS CFO. So
yeah. That's Abu Sayyaf. That's the one we were just talking about.
Yeah. So what does an ISIS CFO do?
Well, apparently he walks around and he makes oil deals. He's an oil man. He just doesn't wear a cowboy hat, I guess. He makes deals with other countries just to sell the oil that they've taken over from Syria. And some of this is true. They do have taken over some oil wells and some oil refineries, but this is not an oil business, right? These guys, do you really think that they can take over the oil well? They can then operate it and extract the oil and then take it and refine it and then they sell it to other countries, and we just can't figure out how they're doing it or just can't figure out who they're selling it to. Come on. Right. Again, this is the same thing we were told when they were marching from Raqqa all the way into Iraq, and nobody had a clue that a terrorist army was marching 200 miles across the desert, despite the fact that we could read a license plate from outer space, and despite the fact, I guess the NSA and the intelligence apparatus, surveillance apparatus was so overwhelmed reading our emails that they couldn't check Iraqi news media to see that these guys were coming across the desert. So essentially, what they're claiming is that the ISIS CFO is the ISIS oil minister, right? He goes out and he makes these oil deals with other countries on the black market, and he takes the money from the black market and he applies it to the ISIS budget, I guess, and that's what Sayyaf was allegedly doing.
So by taking him out, have we supposedly done any damage?
No, because they say in the same articles where they report that they killed him that this is of course a major victory for the United States. Go troops, go America, but they just have people that come up and take up the slack. So it's like a official military organization now, right? So they kill Abu Sayyaf and his second in command takes power. So yeah, it's really, again, I would stress for people to understand that the hours before the American reports, Syrian reports were that they killed a Saudi oil minister, not Saudi, a terrorist oil minister, ISIS oil minister in the same area. So Is this a situation like we had with Mount Sinjar, where the United States comes in and claims they're rescuing the poor Yazidis, when it turns out it's the Kurdish fighters and the Iraqi Kurds that came in and rescued the Yazidis? The U.S. had virtually nothing to do with it. All they got all the credit.
I remember that
They were,
actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were off bombing Erbil to protect the oil fields, while the Kurds, risked life and limb to go save the Yazidis. But the American Marines were the alleged heroes of this situation. So you wonder if this is the case. I don't believe for a sec, or if they just simply made it up. But I don't look. Is the U.S. really attacking ISIS? Would they have really killed an ISIS oil minister if he did in fact exist? I think not. They haven't been doing anything against ISIS to begin with. Remember, the bombing campaign against ISIS in Iraq has only made ISIS stronger. And there's plenty of reports on that. Since the U.S. bombing campaign, ISIS has gained territory. ISIS has become stronger in the areas that they control. Why? Because they're not bombing ISIS. They're bombing Iraqi and Syrian infrastructure. They're bombing civilian infrastructure. They're bombing civilian homes. They're bombing Syrian oil refineries and grain silos. That's why the ISIS fighters have gained territory. The U.S. has been dropping weapons, according to the Iraqi military, and I frankly believe them, to the ISIS fighters. They've been the Iraqi military will call in airstrikes to go on to strike the ISIS fighters that are engaged in battle with them, and the American military will make a mistake and bomb the Iraqis. So this is this is part and parcel of what you see here on the ground. They're not bombing ISIS, and I don't think they sent in special forces to kill some guy that I'm not even really sure exists, to be honest. And I think it's all just a lie.
Now, something that you had said before, where they're really ramping this up, and at some point we're probably sure that this whole ISIS narrative is going to be used in some way to remove whatever civil liberties we have left. One of the things I was talking about yesterday was a story that came out. Oh, I don't remember if it was 2013 or 2014, and I'm sure you remember this, where we supposedly had confiscated an ISIS laptop from some stronghold that we invaded, and on that laptop they found all kinds of information, and one of the bits of information was how to launch a bioterror attack. Do you remember that?
No, actually, I don't remember that.
I found a reference to the story yesterday. I think it was out of Fox News. But they had found information on this laptop. There were all kinds of bomb making and weapons making, and then there was some bioterror stuff. And I was just wondering, because part 2 of the show is going to be a continuation discussing this DOD accidentally shipping out anthrax. You saw that?
Yeah,
A few days
another
back.
coincidence.
Yes, another coincidence. And this isn't the first time this has happened in the last 12 months, as a matter of fact. This is the second time with anthrax, and we had the vials of smallpox just kind of hanging out for 50 years that they found, But it makes me wonder, as this narrative is ramping up and we have ISIS under every bed, and now we have, down in Texas, we had the Mohammed cartoon attack that supposedly was inspired by ISIS. Then with the biker gang brawl, they were kind of trying to make these guys out to be domestic terrorists. If there isn't maybe something waiting in the wings that'll be like a July surprise for us.
Yeah, you have to wonder. And I will say there were domestic terrorists in Texas. There were absolutely domestic terrorists in Texas. They were called the police. And that was who was responsible for most of the deaths, just so everybody knows that. Not defending the stupidity of the bikers, but I'm just pointing that out. The Pamela Geller cartoons, by the way, that's part of a neocon network that is connected to AIPAC. So these people are the same organization that were responsible for that documentary, since we're talking about Benghazi, that documentary that was alleged to have set everyone off in the Muslim world. If you remember that, it was some type of documentary or silly cartoon or something. It was created by the same organization, and they're connected to not only American intelligence, not only to the generally recognized neocon network, but to AIPAC, as well. So this is all set up. There's apparently supposed to be some armed biker rally or something around a mosque or something. I don't know, and I think it's being promoted by a similar network. So, um, yeah, you have to wonder what they're planning. This anthrax issue that just conveniently disappears, and the military just oops happened to make a mistake with anthrax. That's you wonder this idea that again, we've talked about this several times. Lindsey Graham has talked about if we don't bomb Syria, then ISIS is going to detonate a nuclear weapon in Charleston Harbor. Dick Cheney is worried that, or says he's worried that ISIS would, or some terrorist organization would take a nuclear weapon and put it on a flatbed truck and blow it up in the Beltway. He was pretty detailed in his analysis, and we've had other people. I think Obama has also mentioned a nuclear bomb going off in, I think he said New York City.
He did, yes.
Yeah, so all of this stuff, this idea that terrorists would, and again, look at the media as well. If you go back maybe last year and see the last few years of post-apocalyptic movies and even television shows, you can always also go back to the mid-2000s, shows like Jericho, where there's this meme of terrorists putting, or domestic terrorists or terrorists in general, getting nuclear weapons inside major cities and then detonating them. And then, of course, martial law and all kinds of other things follow. And this is the same kind of thing you saw before 9/11, right? Maybe not right before 9/11, but in the years preceding it, you saw these like the lone gunman, right, where you have planes being flown into the Twin Towers, and that's predictive programming, and you can see this. So what are they preparing us for? This idea that ISIS is going to come across the Mexican border and then they're going to get nuclear weapons in the cities and blow them up. I'm not saying that this is going to happen, or I'm not saying that this is the way it's going to happen, but you have to wonder, are we being prepared for this?
Well, I'm going to tell you we are, and I can tell you exactly why. I mean, though that is the narrative that we're seeing in predictive programming. I've talked about this FEMA class that I've taken quite a number of times. It was either in 2006 toward the end or 2007 beginning. It was an 8-week class. It was part of the CERT program funded by FEMA. Bush was still in office, and it was for communities to take training in how to keep you and your family safe in the face of disaster or some sort of terror attack. And this is the same program that the 501c3 came out of for the churches being able to get their hands on overstock military gear, right? But what's so interesting is in that class, so we had all kinds of people come in from different government agencies and give lectures and whatever, but that's exactly what they told us they were preparing for was terrorists coming across the Mexican border, having nuclear weapons and putting them into all of our major cities. And when we were doing training on bioterror attacks, and I was part of the team that worked with my community, with the high school, and how to hand out, in this case, it was Cipro. They were preparing us for anthrax attacks. That's what this was all about. We did this whole training on anthrax. So, I mean, you're figuring that was probably 8-9 years ago already that narrative has been quote unquote official from, at that time, FEMA.
Yeah, and also look at the way the American population is being trained to deal with social breakdown too. Now, I mean, this is not directly related, but I think it ties in. Over the last, it's always been this way in the U.S., but over the last couple of years especially, the radicalization of different groups in the country has increased, right? And the idea here is to make it to where everybody's a part of a little group that can't get along with anyone else who's a part of a different group. And this goes to race, religion, nationality, political beliefs, all this kind of stuff. people are being radicalized, and you see where you have issues that are being turned into racial issues, that blacks versus whites, they can't get along together, and vice versa. The immigration issue has Hispanics against blacks and whites, and vice versa. You have the religious issue, Christians and Muslims. You have political issues, the left wingers, the right wingers, all these little, men, women, gay, straight, all these little groups are being radicalized, and they are being stirred up for a reason. And part of this is because whenever you divide, you can conquer. But another part of it is when you can get these groups separated, you could always turn them on each other, cause tension, diversion, or use them in the kind of color revolution apparatus. But also, if you have some type of major disturbance, whether it's a terrorist attack or whether it's a bioweapons attack or the breakdown of society in general, you have a group, you have millions, hundreds of millions of people who simply can't get along with each other because they've been trained to hate each other. Right? So this is another issue that then you can see the total breakdown of society. Just thought I'd throw that out there to people. So whenever they watch these media reports of something that gets turned into a racial issue or a left versus right issue, to maybe take a step back, take a breath, and get off the internet for a few hours.
Well, and you're exactly right. I mean, and it even goes beyond that. What's the most recent? The vaccine versus anti-vaxxer debate, where people are going at each other's throats, and it works very well.
Yeah, it does. And, that's another issue that they kind of turned, they tried to turn left versus right as well, because you have, people on the left are generally the more radical ones regarding vaccines, although this kind of goes back and forth between different groups. But they turned that into a left versus right issue. They turned the gun issue into a left versus right issue. They even have turned the issue of police brutality into white versus black, left versus right issue. So it's important for people to kind of stay on message. But the vaccine issue, from what I understand, Vermont has just removed the philosophical exemption. And people are going to end up having to deal with some hard choices here in the near future because the law is not going to be on their side.
Right, and there's that Vaccinate All Children Act of 2015 now that's sitting. I don't know if it was I think it was the House, because it was HR something was the bill number. That is wanting to get rid of any type of exemption except for medical exemptions, and it would only be for a short period of time, and you would have to be reevaluated by your physician once a year, I believe, and then the quote-unquote health administrator at the school would have to determine whether or not your doctor who gave you that exemption was a doctor that they considered to be legitimate.
Yeah, so they'll be sure not to accept anything from a naturopath, or
Right.
probably even if your medical doctor determines that you have an issue, then they can override that. So isn't that nice? They give the school bureaucrat authority over the doctor. So that's
Right.
what the agenda is. But people are really going to have to make some hard choices. And again, this is one reason why you should get out and fight when you have the opportunity. Right. This is what I've said before. Right. You have to fight this on a number of different levels. At some point, you may be forced with the requirement that you have to resist by any and all means. But right now, you have to get involved and you have to get active to oppose this kind of stuff. But you also, if you have a little victory, if you have a situation where you win and you fight back this new law, then you have to go on the offensive. You have to keep them on the defensive. And I think people really, there's been a decrease in activism and a decrease in motivation. And I can understand the desire or the problem that people face here when they look around, they work so hard, and then they see that their labor has gone nowhere. But at the same time, what else are you going to do? You're going to lay down and let this go? People are going to have to start standing up now and doing something now, whatever it is they can do, because this is, we've come a long way and it's in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and I find it very frightening. I mean, anyone, at least for the vaccine debate, I mean, if you want to put that in the forefront, or the GMO debate, or any of these big ones, anyone that has children that's sitting back and just letting this happen can't have a conscience. How can anyone let this happen to the future of their child?
And not only that, I mean, a lot of these people are quiet because they're afraid of the reaction that they're going to get from their friends who are sitting on a couch staring at a box all day, right? These people, the trendies who it doesn't matter what the trend would be, they'd be radical and in favor of it. It doesn't matter, you know, these are the same people who would, well, I won't go into that, but they're afraid of the social ostracization, right? This idea of if you speak out, then your friends will get mad at you, right? And then maybe you'll be the unpopular person at the party. Well, if you're afraid of that, if that's your biggest fear, then you know, God, where is your courage? Why would you want to be around people who are that mentally weak and disabled that they can't even handle someone who disagrees with them? If you're afraid to say what you believe in around your friends, then you're not they're not your friends. You know, that's why I want people to understand it's time for them to speak out, even if it's just within a group of family or friends or in a social situation where they're asked a question. I mean, I'm trying to get people to understand that even a little bit of courage would go a long way. You know, I'm at a loss for words here, but I'm always really discouraged by people who can't even bring themselves to speak out to two or three of their close friends and say, no, sorry, I don't agree with that, I'm not going to do that. What do you think they're going to do when things really hit the fan? You
Right.
know, you have no courage at all, and if you can't speak your truth around the people that you're closest to, then you're not free at all, and you're not in a group of people who you can trust. So I don't know, I just kind of went on a rant there. I don't know
No,
if
it
that's
was a
even
good
relevant.
rant. I mean, here's the thing. There are some of us, and a lot of the people listening, I'm sure, are in this group who don't have issues speaking our mind to our friends, even if we are on completely opposite sides of the planet on an issue. But the problem that comes along with that is that most of your friends think you wear a tinfoil hat. And I think some of the most pleasure that I have found in the last few years of standing up and opening my mouth is that there's quite a number of friends now who have come around completely to the other side and said, hey, you know what? I think you had something there. I think you were right. You know, I've been looking into this now, and there's really some problems. You know, all that stuff you were talking about years ago, there's something to that. And I think that, you know, some people give up too easily. But the sad fact of the matter is, even beyond our friends and family, going back to this vaxxer, anti-vaxxer debate, is, you know, these doctors, we've seen what happens to doctors when they speak up against the system, right? They end up losing their license. They end up being blackballed. Their, you know, research or their name gets smeared. And so how many doctors are really going to stand up to some sort of federal law, right, saying that you need to have a doctor's note? How many doctors, mainstream doctors, are going to support you in saying that, you know, your child shouldn't be getting this vaccine, let's say? I mean, I'm going to say probably close to zero.
Yeah, close to zero, and that's if you find doctors that are supporting you to begin with, because you're dealing with a population that is there's a very small amount of doctors who believe that there's issues with vaccines, and you know unfortunately the egos are so overwhelmingly massive that it's almost impossible to convince them of anything or even get them to take a look at anything simply because it was presented by the rabble there, you know, at the uneducated class that presented it to them. So, I mean, the issue here is not even whether vaccines are safe or whether they're effective. They're not. That's not the issue, though. The issue is whether or not you have the choice to determine that for yourself or to vaccinate yourself or your children. And you know, I should point out here that there was an article recently where Jenna Elfman went to when they were debating that bill in California. She went to speak out to the boards, the congressional boards, and say, you know, I support parental choice, regardless of what that choice is. I don't support this bill. And she vaccinates her kids. She believes that vaccines work, but she recognizes the fact that if a parent's choice is taken away on this issue, it can be taken away on other issues. And we've gotten to the point, where I wish other people really understood that, but we've gotten to the point where parental rights have been chipped away little bit by little bit to the point where CPS can act as gods now. The medical doctors can act as gods now, and parents have allowed this. They've allowed this little bit by little bit. They've allowed it, and I don't know what else to say. I mean, that's not the issue. Or also, it's not just children, because if you think it's going to stop with the kids, then you're mistaken, because this is going to come for other people. Remember, they're now trying to force daycare workers to take vaccines, and if you don't take vaccines as a daycare worker, you get fired. You don't have a job. This is the same thing they're doing to nurses as well. You think this is going to stop with the kids? So if there's anybody out there saying, well, I don't have kids, it's not an issue with me, that's not true. It's going to be an issue for you, and it's going to be an issue for you sooner rather than later.
And the thing is, I mean, I know talking about this, it doesn't sound like the vaccine debate has anything to do with ISIS or what's going on in the Middle East, but it most certainly does, because it's this entire narrative of fear, be afraid, the government knows what's good for you, do what we tell you to do, and you will stay safe. And there's just so many people that buy into that, don't ask questions. And our society has been bred that way over the last few generations at least. And it's very disturbing to me.
Well, it does kind of tie in also, because in Syria, you remember we sent the polio vaccine over to Syria because they were experiencing polio again. And of course, it was because of the lack of vaccines, right? It had nothing to do with the fact that 250,000 people were killed and there were bombs dropping day in and day out and people were getting their heads chopped off and the water was off and the power was off. No, it was the lack of vaccines. So they sent these vaccines over, and how many children were sickened and died as a result of the vaccines? The Syrians saw this and they realized what was going on, but Americans, they don't seem to recognize anything.
Well, that's interesting you brought that story up, because I was trying to remember. I thought it was Pakistan with the polio vaccines and all the children dying. But when I started digging into it, it ends up that it was uncovered that was some sort of CIA psyop that was going on there. But maybe it was Syria where all the children.
Both.
What was that?
It was both.
What? Syria and Pakistan?
Yeah, and I think there were some issues in India as well.
Yeah, India's had a lot of problems. I mean, it's just horrifying. It's horrifying, and they are forcing compliance is what's happening.
Yeah, they're forcing compliance, and people are complying. That's the problem, this. I really wish I had more hope for America. I have hope, but not great expectations.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, what a treat it was to have you on again for a Friday.
How do you like me to end the show like that?
Yeah. Well, hey, you could spin it on a positive note. You have an interview in a couple hours.
Yeah, tune into Fox. I'll be real positive.
Okay, I did find the stream for anyone who's listening who wants to catch it, who's not in chat. Brandon will be on at 3 p.m. Eastern, correct?
Right.
On Fox News out of Southern Utah. The link for the live stream is foxnews1450.com/listen-live. And if you can get a copy of that interview once it's over, I will do like we did the last time and rip it up for those who missed it, and we'll post it.
Awesome. We'll do that.
All right, Brandon. Well, you have an awesome Friday, and I'm sure I'll catch you here over the next couple days. Also, I want to say thank you again for bringing Alan Watt to UCY. He'll be airing his newest show tomorrow afternoon at 6 p.m. Eastern, and I was working on his UCY page last night, so I'll send that to you so you can see it.
Great. I'd like to see it. I'm glad he's on UCY.
Yeah, it's a big treat. All right, Brandon. Well, you have a great Friday, and I will catch up with you soon.
All right, you too. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, guys, so Friday with Brandon. That was really awesome. We talked about a lot of stuff, but I really enjoy his perspective. I try to keep up on what's going on in the Middle East, especially. But I mean, as you guys all know, it is just right now, as far as the flow of information coming from every direction, it's so difficult to keep up with the details. So having Brandon on is like a crash course in what's happened this past week in the Middle Eastern theater that we see going on over there. So, all right, what we are going to do now for the second hour, and yes, there is a second hour, but hey, I took a couple days off this week, actually, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday didn't turn out too well, so I figured why not? We'll do a second hour. I caught up with April Boden yesterday afternoon because I saw that she had posted a link to a story that she had written back in 2011 talking about anthrax and some of her ideas with what the whole federal drumbeat was about. They were working on an anthrax vaccine that was in the national stockpile. And she was really thinking that there might be some sort of false flag attack because, hey, you can't have multi-million dollars worth of vaccine sitting around that no one has to use. Now, before we get to the interview, though, I want to talk about a story that I found this morning. So we did some clips yesterday in regards to the DOD shipping out these 9 samples of anthrax virus to different labs around the U.S. and one to South Korea. And they sent them via commercial transport thinking that they were killed virus. We had also gone back a year to July of 2014 and found that the CDC had done something very similar. There was a big congressional inquiry into it. We listened to that clip as well. And they had talked about, we don't know how this happens, but yes, we're going to make sure that security is our top priority, et cetera, et cetera. So interesting that we find like almost an identical situation happened just less than a year later. But I found a story this morning. Let's hear how they're explaining this. This was on NBC News. I really don't ever pay attention to NBC News, but I was caught by the title. It says, "Tough spores may explain anthrax blunder," experts say. Hard to kill anthrax spores may explain why the Department of Defense accidentally sent out quote unquote live samples of the bacteria, experts say. So let's hear what their excuse is. They said that the spores are so tough and so tiny that the irradiation procedure used to deactivate the spores may not have killed every single one. John Peterson, a microbiology professor who works with anthrax at the University of Texas Medical Branch, says the X-rays or gamma rays used to kill anthrax spores might not get every little one. Quote, "They were most likely inactivated, but that inactivation process may not have been complete," he told NBC News. Anthrax spores are only about 1 micron in diameter, and a sample could contain 10 billion, with a B, individual spores, he said. If a procedure kills 99.999% of the bacteria, there would still be 100,000 spores left viable, he said. They are very difficult to kill. Now, wow, color me purple, but that would seem to be a big problem now, wouldn't it? Considering that our high level 4 security biolabs have thought all this time by irradiating samples it would inactivate them. And now we find out that, oh, whoops, no, it just might not. Come on now. What kind of confidence do you put in any of these clowns dealing with any of this virulent material? And this is why I am still pointing to this, and we talked about it with Brandon too, that I think there's really something being set up here. They told us almost 10 years back They told us about anthrax and bioterror and terrors coming across the Mexican borders and putting nukes in our cities and holding us hostage. That was the official federal narrative that they were preparing cities for across America. And here I see that it is coming to fruition. We have terrorists on under every bed, and now we have this anthrax that we thought that was killed that's been shipped to who knows where, to who knows what kind of biolab facility. I mean, they said yesterday that because they thought it was, or maybe actually it was a story from July, because they thought it was inactive, they had sent it to all these lower level security labs that didn't have high level security as far as protocols and containment. So let me finish the story, and then I'll run the interview with April and her thoughts. It says, that's why, even though anthrax is not terribly infectious, and it is not fatal if it gets treated in time, and yes, we found out yesterday that by the time you show symptoms, and I believe they said it was anywhere from 1 to 42 days, but by the time you showed symptoms, that it was too late already to get treatment. So it says, it is not fatal if it gets treated in time, but it is considered a potential biological weapon. The tough spores can be dispersed into the air and linger for months or even years. Now that's a first. I haven't read that before. Even years. Putting people at risk of infection. The DOD is trying to explain how and why anthrax spores were sent to labs in 9 states. Now, wait, there was something that we didn't hear yesterday either. How? Well, I thought we found out it was some sort of commercial transport, but they're also questioning why? Now, that's a problem. I would hope you'd know why you were sending out samples of anthrax, or are we going to find out we have ISIS in labs that were collecting these samples? I mean, come on, this is just ridiculous. And it was sent to an Air Force base, so I wasn't sure what the base was in South Korea, in recent months. So what does the Air Force need with anthrax? At least 26 people who handled or were near the samples are taking antibiotics now, just in case they breathed any of the spores. Officials say the investigation is focusing on the irradiation process used to inactivate the spores. Anthrax bacteria.
Problem. Just a little.
Uh-oh, hold on.
Was favorited was one in
Hold
which...
on. I got to kill that. All right. Sorry about that. Anthrax bacteria, scientific name is Bacillus anthracis, lives in the soil normally. They make spores when living conditions get tough, for instance, if it gets very dry. And when conditions improve, everything it needs to live again is there. It can sense its nutrients. Blah, 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 blah. Officials said the government labs that received the potentially live anthrax samples were at the Army's Edgewood Proving Ground in Maryland and the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Virginia. The Pentagon has declined to identify any of the other labs. That, again, is another very concerning comment to me. All right, let me launch this interview now. So this is April Boden and myself yesterday afternoon discussing her take on this live anthrax being shipped out and some of the things that she sees. Hopefully this will launch for me, and it's trying. April's wonderful. By the way, Truth or Talk, April and Verstein, is aired every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Eastern here on UCY. And Truth on the Track's new episode with Brandon Turbeville is aired every Monday, and then we rebrought him on Friday night at 9 p.m.
We have April here from Truth Talk Radio. How are you this morning?
Fantastic. Hey, Jules, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. So listen, the reason why I wanted to talk to you today is because the show we did yesterday, we kind of took a look at what was going on with that new 9 sites that were shipped anthrax by the Department of Defense, and they had assumed that it was killed virus. Then we discovered that it was live virus, potentially at least in one location. And I had seen after the show, you had a post about a story you had done. Was it last year or 2011?
It was 2011, so it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, in regards to anthrax and a false flag and them having this leftover vaccine and whatever. And we've gotten into all of that yesterday. So I really wanted to hear your take on what you think with all these never before seen or haven't been seen in 50 years and in regards to this whole vaccine backer, anti-vaxxer debate. Seems to be pretty interesting landscape that's forming, huh?
Indeed, yes. It is we're very divided at this point. It seems like the anti-vaxxers are very clear about their position and the pro-vaxxers are very clear about theirs. So it's quite interesting at the moment. But yeah, back in 2011, there was an article talking about how the Obama administration was looking to test anthrax vaccines on children. They wanted to do a trial. And this, was going to be something that would be difficult to do. But the reasoning for this was because, well, if there was an event, and this was their exact words, is that they could basically work on recruit people to work on this trial right now so that they could test it and make sure that it was safe. Or if there was an event and there was an anthrax terror attack, then they basically have to just inoculate people in the face of an actual threat. This was their exact words. And so at the time I thought, that's not very savory. I don't know who is going to want to sign their kids up for these trials to do these anthrax vaccines. And why are they even worried about it? Because it's really not a huge threat to us. It shouldn't be as far as, go ahead, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I really think that was all part of this, 2001 narrative that spun in regards to Department of Homeland Security, and then this Project BioShield, a training that I had taken back in, I don't remember if it was the end of 2006 or 2007. It was sponsored by, at that time, FEMA. Bush was still in office, and it was all about learning to keep your family safe. But part of that training, it was like 8 weeks we went through, and part of that training was in regards to pandemics in our local community. So I had become part of that group that, we did drills at the local high school, and we figured out how we get the whole town to come through and be able to give them, in this case for anthrax, that's what they were training us for, was Cipro, how to get the whole community Cipro. But with the children, my biggest worry, and I do vaguely remember when that story came out, is that I had friends that had gone into the Gulf War back in the early 90s, and they all had to take that anthrax vaccine, the original one, that was loaded with the squalene. And many of my friends got very sick they were never able to have children and had that, what they called the quote-unquote Gulf War syndrome.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wrote an article about that, too, because I had a friend who was a Marine, and she did an interview with me over an essay, or I wrote it in an essay. It wasn't a recorded interview, but she had numerous illnesses. She had somewhere in the ballpark of 10 or 12 different diagnoses of autoimmune diseases, mostly fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and all those types of things. She kept ending up in the hospital. She had a violent miscarriage. She couldn't have children, et cetera, et cetera. So, these things were really, really harmful to the people that took them, the vaccines. And as you probably have talked about with the Gulf War syndrome, a lot of the people who developed Gulf War syndrome never got deployed to Iraq, but yet they still came down with it. So those were the people who just got it from the vaccine. It was very obvious that that's what was going on there. And so what you're talking about, the incident that took place back in 2001, now I did mention that in the article as well, because as it turned out, that was a whole supposed terror attack where they sent the envelope. They said that who did they blame it on? It was someone in there working in their lab. It was a lone gunman, and he was said to have been the only one who had done this. He had sent this anthrax
envelope and to this other lab, and it had wounded many people in it. It had killed a few people, and one of the men who had died was his widow actually filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government saying that they were responsible for his death. And she got a settlement. I don't know exactly. They never disclosed the amount that she received, but they did admit to some malfeasance, so not necessarily that they sent it, but at least that they had been neglectful in allowing him to get it and to receive contact with it. So, I think that was very suspicious, because then that guy ended up committing suicide in 2008, the supposed lone gunman.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know about the lawsuit either. Wow.
Yeah. So she filed the suit, and she blamed it on the government. And a lot of the what her attorney was arguing, the point was also about the gunman. What was his name? I think it was Russell Bryn. He said that that this guy, first of all, didn't even have the access, as far as they knew, to this anthrax. He wasn't, considered a lab guy that could create it himself. He wasn't one of the people that wasn't what he did. And so, but they claimed that he was the one who did it, and he was the lone gunman, and he ended up committing suicide before he was able to even defend himself in 2008.
Wow. You sure you didn't find it sitting on top of a filing cabinet in the back room somewhere?
I think maybe. Right. That's the other thing, is are they just that incompetent?
Well, and that's my question. That's what I was trying to establish today. Like, it completely flabbergasts me as to how we can have these level 4 labs. And, for what, 50 years we've just had 5 vials of smallpox just sitting there and no one noticed? It's just, but then make sure that, we do what they say, because they're going to keep us safe. I found a video that I played yesterday from I think it was 2011, and he was the head of the CDC, some general-looking guy. He was wearing this, almost looked like a military uniform, so I don't know what he was, but it was a CDC video, and he was just going on about, how dangerous anthrax is, and here's all the different ways you can get it. They can infect livestock, and you can ingest it, or they could have a truck or an airplane fly over and aerosolize it everywhere and blah, blah, blah. And we take it very seriously that we're protecting these, pathogens and whatever. And then here we have, just Dumber and Dumber 3 times in a row now within less than 12 months between the smallpox and then 2 anthrax incidents.
Well, it could just very well be that they are that incompetent. Right. I mean, that's a big possibility. But my thesis back in 2011 was that there would be some kind of staged event to try and unload their vaccines, because the government, they were trying to give this trial on children, and no one was going to sign their kids up to join this trial, so they were going to have to do it by force. I just can't imagine any parent willing to do that. So they would either have to take orphans, which they've been known to do before, and just take them that way, or they were going to have to kind of just dump them wherever. And because they had spent about $1 billion, I think it was $1.1 billion, a stockpile of anthrax vaccines to protect the Americans in case of an event. And there was no event. There was nothing happening. There was no threat to the public. And so what were they going to do with all those vaccines?
Right.
They were either going to send them over to the third world, for whatever. But there was just no reason for it. It was considered very, very low risk in 2000, even in 2001, after the attack on the lab, where there were a few people that did die. That even after that, it was still considered an extremely low risk, and even if people did become infected, that they could use antibiotics to treat it. Mm-hmm. And it was killed by antibiotics. So there wasn't really any need for people to take preemptive action against it. And so, but yet they had this stockpile of $1.1 billion worth of vaccines. And they're not going to spend that kind of money and then just waste it.
Well, exactly. And now if you take a look at how, Johnny's Disney vacation got ruined because of the anti-vaxxer family, you know, and how important it is to make sure you have your children vaccinated. I mean, I could see it very easily now, the way they've been drumming this drum, and not only with children, but did you see with the dog flu? This is kind of one of the things I've been following as well. There was a story that came out, maybe a week before the dog flu story started trickling out, about how they've discovered that dogs, the reason why when dogs look into their owner's eyes, you always feel this great sense of love, is because dogs cause humans to produce oxytocin. Of course, being a mom, you know exactly what oxytocin is, right? It's that bonding love chemical. And so, I mean, you have friends that don't have kids, but they have their pets, and they treat their pets like their kids. I mean, you see that reaction. So I was looking at it this way. I'm like, all right, so we have now all the separation between the people with children who are vaccinated and the people who aren't. And once you have a child, you're like mama bear, you know, you're going to fight to the death. So they really have pitted us against each other. But then you have this whole other contingent of our population that has pets, but not children. So how better to get them on the side of the vaccine companies, you know what I mean, pushing this vaccine agenda. Now let's have this big outbreak of doggy flu that, oh my God, it could kill the dogs, and how to, you know, take them to the vet and get them a shot.
Well, you know, because there's a huge anti-vaccine community in pet owners. Veterinarians have been way ahead of pediatricians and medical doctors for humans as far as questioning the safety and efficacy of vaccination. I mean, they've actually, for years, there's been a lot of doctors who space them out, or who, you know, question whether or not all the vaccines are necessary, because they've been seeing pets get sick. And so, you know, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this is kind of how my whole vaccine journey started, was back in the late 80s with a cat, the most beautiful specimen of a creature you've ever seen. He looked like a jaguar. Beautiful, beautiful animal. A year old, getting his rabies vaccine. And shortly thereafter, on his leg, he got a lump, and it turned into sarcoma. His whole back leg ended up like a piece of Swiss cheese. It's pretty awful. And they amputated the leg, and the doctor had asked me if they could send his leg to Cornell University, because there was a huge study going on showing that how the 3-year rabies vaccine was causing these sarcomas. And that was exactly the reason why they no longer give pets injections in the neck. If you notice, they changed that now. They do it in the legs. Because in the neck, it got into the spine, and there was nothing you could do. But it's been well known, and not only was it the 3-year vaccine, she said the 1 year was safe, but it was the adjuvant, which at that time was like aluminum sulfate or whatever, the adjuvant in the 3-year that caused the cancer. So, I mean, that was back in the 80s.
Right. And they still use those same adjuvants.
They do, but you're absolutely right. My veterinarians, I've always told that story when I've gotten a new veterinarian for my pets, and they have always gone along with me that, yes, they feel that your immunity goes way beyond the 1 year or the 3 years or whatever they recommend for the booster, and as long as your animals aren't outdoor pets, let's say, that they felt pretty confident, especially with a cat, not to have to follow the American Veterinary Association schedule.
Right.
So how great is that, though? I trust my vet more than my family doctor.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's, you know, they've been ahead of the game for some reason. They just have picked up on it sooner, and maybe it wasn't as controversial to talk about when it comes to dogs and pets as it was to talk about with humans. But yeah, I mean, I believe, I'm trying to find the reference on this right now, but I read many, many years ago that the term allergy and anaphylaxis actually was named after a vaccine reaction that was when there was a trial done on dogs. There was a trial done on dogs, and I think it was the smallpox vaccine. So this is many, many years ago. And some of them had what was anaphylaxis, which is Greek for, I think, upon itself, or something of that nature. And it was attack upon itself. So it caused their bodies to attack upon themselves, and they died. And so all these dogs just had went into anaphylactic shock and died. And so that's where that name actually came from. So that came from a vaccine trial.
It's interesting that, of course, the attack upon itself is what autoimmune does to your body.
Right, exactly. And then, when they put these things in, or they cultivate them with animal or human DNA, it sort of trains your body to do that, because the idea is that when they inject you, you're going to have an antibody response. Well, they're injecting you with all these different things that you're going to react to, including cells that are very similar to your own. So then when people have cells that are attacking themselves, where do they think that that's coming from? It's like everything that you get injected with ends up becoming an allergy to you, including your own body.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's because your immune system is looking around going, okay, there's a foreign invader, but where is it? I mean, it's been integrated within your cells.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what Dr. Suzanne Humphrey says very elegantly, is how, there really is no such way for a vaccine to actually be safe and effective, because it doesn't take into consideration the complexity of the immune system. It just doesn't. An antibody itself is very easily pliable. It's not necessarily going to. Just because you produce an antibody to something doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be affected by the disease. So it's not. There really isn't any science that says that you can develop immunity artificially like this, but yet that's the basis that it goes on.
Right.
As if it's real. So this whole idea of this anthrax thing, when I heard that this morning, I thought, oh gosh, that reminds me of this article that I wrote many years ago. Because at the time, I didn't think that it came into fruition. I thought, and I just forgot about it. But it was, it just reminded me of that. Oh yeah, this $1.1 billion stockpile of anthrax vaccines has got to go somewhere, and they've been known to take out expired vaccines many, many times. It's not like they care about that. People will get ones that have been sitting around for many, many years. And a lot of the adjuvants are supposed to keep them preserved for any period of time. But
well, right. And if we had a declared emergency, you said that they didn't have people lining up with their children to, get this new vaccine test done. But if there's a declared emergency, they've done such a great job of making people afraid now over the last even 12 months of all these different pathogens and how they're going to keep us safe.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And if they can get people afraid of the measles, to the point where they're freaking out about the measles, which, of our generation, our parents got the measles. My mom was visiting a few weeks ago, and she said, I got the measles, and I'm pretty sure I also got the shot. But because, we don't really know that that the measles shot was actually invented in 1963, and the decline was taking place already. It was already pretty much eradicated at that point. So there's no evidence to show that the vaccine actually stopped people from getting the measles, because it was already going away. But and now it's still something that is very unlikely to be fatal in this country, but yet people are freaking out about it. There's many things that people can get and get sick and die from that we never talk about.
Right. Like those brain amoebas you can get swimming down in the water in Florida. I think I'd be more worried about that than the measles.
For real. All kinds of bacteria and parasites and all kinds of weird things, flesh-eating bacteria and stuff you can come into contact with. We never talk about any of those things. The only thing we ever talk about are things that there's a vaccine made for.
Or the botulism in your church potato salad,
Yeah, there's a million different ways. And if we started looking at all of the different ways that people could get killed, and we started freaking out about every single one of them, we'd all be, what is that word, where you're phobic to leave your house.
Yeah.
Right? Even your own house is riddled with bacteria. So obviously we have these things called immune systems that are supposed to protect us from all these things. That's why we're not just dropping like flies whenever we come into contact with any little bacteria, because there's so many of them. And the way that the immune system works is so complex and so elegant that we just couldn't possibly replicate it. And but yet there's this arrogance that they can just fight disease with this by creating this immune response or creating this antigen. and it's just not so. But it's just interesting. Now we're getting they're all over the place with this news about this anthrax, and it doesn't sound like anyone's been hurt from it either. So that's the other thing, is this, making this big stink in the media in order to get everybody afraid of a possibility of anthrax, when it really doesn't sound like anyone got hurt from it.
Yeah, I didn't see that, and it may have only been one sample out of 9. They're in the process of testing them all now, but thank goodness we have vaccines for anthrax loaded in the national stockpile.
Right. Isn't that convenient?
Yeah.
They're ready to go, just in case you guys need it. So, I mean, I don't know. Are people going to fall for that? It's really kind of up to the public at this point. I don't really know. I sure won't,
Well,
but
the CDC guy said that one aerial spraying could affect up to 100,000 people at a crack.
Right. And I mean, who knows what they're sending out with these aerial spraying, too.
Exactly. That's what I mentioned. Yeah, I mean, who knows?
We don't really know.
And it's like the symptoms start out like the flu. Well, how many of these different, we had, what was that mysterious cough that ended up, they were blaming it on pertussis, but then it had the paralysis with it. Do you remember that in the Pacific Northwest last year?
Yeah.
And then we had some tuberculosis outbreaks in a few of the high schools. I was like, what? Tuberculosis in a high school? But upper respiratory type things. Then we had some pneumonic plague happen. I saw just recently in a dog, the dog apparently passed it on to humans all of a sudden. But they all have similar symptoms. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be very easy for them to orchestrate some sort of emergency.
Yeah, for sure. Either it's just because there's only a few options, really. They're either really incompetent and just blowing it and not really taking care of these things that they're supposed to be so dangerous and deadly, and they're just sending them by FedEx or whatever, and not really paying attention to what they're doing, which, that's possible. If you've ever been, to the DMV or any kind of government agency, you know that there is that going around. And then there's also the possibility that they want to dump these vaccines somewhere, if they haven't already. Who knows? They might have already been used on the military. But as far as the aerial spraying goes, there's been vaccines used via aerial spraying before, many, many times. I think there was, even in Florida, they did dengue fever, a dengue fever spray. And even dengue fever wasn't a threat, but they did it. And there's been many, Brazil had one, I think had an aerial spraying for malaria. And there was what were they, the GMO mosquitoes?
Yeah, well, that's what I was just going to say about the dengue fever that wasn't a threat. And all of a sudden now we have the GMO mosquitoes that are being released in the Keys to combat what? Dengue fever.
Right. So it's just kind of science fiction out of control at this point, because I don't even know. Christine and I were talking about this on a recent show, and I can't remember all the. We looked up all the different places that had been aerial spraying, and it was. It was all over. It was like Africa, and when they're dealing with things like mosquitoes, they don't really even know how far it's going and how much. We're traveling, we're going through planes and boats to all these different countries, and how much we're passing all this stuff around. It's a science experiment. It's that's basically what we're involved in, even though we don't really realize that that's what we're involved in, maybe. But that is, they're looking to see what they can do to us and how much we can change, how much we can mutate, and because these things are mutagenic. These things are changing our DNA. They're changing how the DNA or the message that's being sent to the RNA. They're changing our very genes. They're changing. It's reassigning them, reassorting them, deleting them.
Absolutely.
All these really dark things are occurring, and then they're saying, "Well, you have a genetic predisposition." Well, are you sure?
Yeah, right.
Are you sure that it wasn't you that gave me that genetic problem, or in the first place, or with these vaccines, and you're getting them on the day of life, or your parents had them, or the mother had it during pregnancy, even before the child was born, and so or from the air. even if you choose not to vaccinate and you completely bypass that problem and you just, the food, I think we had Patrick Jordan on our show, and he said that the pesticides that they used in these genetically engineered foods were called adjuvants.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, oh, so they're vaccinating us through our food?
Well, that's not far off either. If you really start digging into the whole RNAi technology, Monsanto's using the same exact technologies that they were using in some of the new Ebola vaccinations.
Right.
It's pretty frightening. And you're absolutely correct. They're manipulating our genes at a level now, especially that we couldn't even imagine. It's even crazier than a science fiction novel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's, I can't say, you wouldn't know how far back this would go, because how long has this manipulation been going on? So it's like, what was our genes, what were we supposed to be had we not been interfered with? It's like, I don't even think we would any way be able to unravel it at this point.
The biggest key for me was digging into Plum Island and discovering that they brought over some of the Nazi scientists from Operation Paperclip to help them there. And they were using insects as disease vectors, mosquitoes, fleas, ticks. And now you take a look at like Lyme disease, and now we have this Paswana disease, this new tick-borne virus that's the cousin of Lyme, but it can kill you. It's pretty horrible. And it's just unbelievable. And I think that they all came from there, honestly.
Yeah, well, you're not alone on that. There's some, I think there's, it's called OhioActionLyme.org. You can go find they have a complaint against the U.S. government for basically creating these bioweapons and then putting them out into the world and then telling people or giving them to people through their vaccines. And that includes Lyme's disease. But I think what their take on Lyme's disease is basically like all these things are a form of Lyme's disease, but they won't necessarily call it that. Sometimes it's autoimmune, or sometimes it's this other thing. But it's basically that's what it is, or it's Epstein-Barr. It's these types of autoimmune diseases that are really being caused by these creations that they made at Plum Island. These bioweapons. I don't know. I haven't followed it to the T. Well, but I think that's going on.
I think it is going on, and I'll tell you why. Because even in Wikipedia, which, I don't really trust Wikipedia, but there's little nuggets of info there. It had talked about Nixon in 1969 discontinuing the biowarfare program of the United States. And at the end of his speech that he gave, and I actually just put this in the notes of the show from yesterday, it says, the United States shall renounce the use of lethal biological agents and weapons and all other methods of biological warfare. The United States will confine its biological research to defensive measures such as immunizations and safety measures. Well, of course, to create an immunization to any of these pathogens, you have to have the pathogen itself, right?
Right.
And how else are you going to test out your new vaccine unless people start getting sick? And DARPA money for vaccinations and the National Institute of Health money is sprinkled all over Big Pharma to help develop under the guise of this Project BioShield, this Department of Homeland Security protection against biowarfare. So I think they're 100% connected. We never gave up our biowarfare program. It just changed cloaks, Oh,
of course not. Why would we? It's just like the whole with the MK Ultra thing. Oh, well, we did that. We brainwashed all these people and we took them away from their homes when they were children. But, our bad. We're sorry. We're not going to do it anymore.
Right.
Please. Why would they stop? They just change names. Or they reassign the program to a different department or something like that so that they can say that they're ending it, but they're really, I can't see any reason why they would, especially when it's, like you said, they brought in these Nazi scientists. They brought them over for a reason. They knew exactly what they were doing. And what were they doing over there during the war? They were experimenting.
They were doing exactly what they brought them here to do, was to create pathogens that attack. Typically they would
focus on animals and livestock, but they were using insects as disease vectors, and so that can be for anything. And I mean, think about now with, I don't know how it is out on your coast, but on this coast, the East Coast, they are warning that the woods this year are going to be just teeming with ticks. Now, how do you fight against that?
Right.
You know, and let's say that things go bad in this country and people think that they're going to flee or whatever. How long do you think people are going to last in infected woods?
Right.
You know, and how do you fight against fleas? And then I just saw first case ever of the chronic wasting disease in deer now in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, out here, we don't have the same types of ticks and things, but we had the bird flu. You know, we had concerns like that, and there was another one, I forget, that was going through the mosquitoes a while ago. We haven't, you know, had any warnings about anything recently.
Well, measles. You guys had the ever...
Yeah, you can't go to
measles, yes.
Right. As you might get the measles, which, by the way, you know, measles infection actually has been known to help people prevent cancer. If you get a natural acquisition of the measles, there's been quite a lot of research on it being a cancer preventer. So is fever. And the first thing they do when you get vaccinated is they tell you, suppress your fever, take Tylenol. Well, the fever actually helps you detox it. So there's that. And just to add to it. But, I mean, this whole idea of us being genetically altered, I think that's quite clear also because human genes now, I mean, there's over, 150 or maybe I'm lowballing patents on human genes. You know, and we saw that thing happened a few years ago with Angelina Jolie she had her healthy breasts removed because of the potential of having breast cancer because she had a faulty gene.
Yeah, don't even get me started on that because, well, did you see she now had her ovaries removed too, I believe?
I heard, yes. So she's right. So, I mean, she just took it all out.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the whole idea that, you know, these genes could be patented in the first place is odd. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's this lab in Utah that seems to be holding the patents on all of these genes. But, I mean, it's convenient for them. It's just like with the food, you know. If they can genetically engineer it, they can patent it and they can actually control food. So it seems to be the same with us now.
Right,
you know?
Right.
We're going to genetically engineer these genes and then patent those. And even as far as being able to genetically alter humans in utero, I read an article, like about 6 months ago, about a family that traveled from Australia here to the United States to have, because they wanted to have a girl, and they kept having boys. So they were able to genetically reassign the gender to make sure that they had a girl. So there's designer babies.
Oh, God, I didn't know they were already doing that. I heard about the 3 parents babies that they've been working on. I think that was in the UK, but I didn't know that they were already working on sex assignment.
Yeah, sex assignment. So I think that it's pretty much said at this point that genes are being changed in order to be altered. I'm sorry, excuse me. Baby distracted me for a second. They're good at that. So, so I'm saying there's this whole line of patents. If you want to get real scared, you look up the epigenome projects as far as what, you know, is what all the patents and things that they're holding on to already and what they're planning to try and get patent to the patent offices. You want to look those things up.
Oh, I need to find that. We've spent a lot of time on the microbiome and the epigenome, but I did not know about the patents.
Oh gosh, yeah, there was a ton of patents, either pending or they've already got. And there's been some fight against it. There's been some pushback against the ACLU has filed some lawsuits against their ability to patent these genes because they're saying, well, isn't that a human life? Isn't that something that occurs in nature? How can you hold a patent on it? But that's the thing. Is it really occurring in nature? Or are they actually engineering it, in which case they can hold a patent on it?
Exactly. And I think it's the latter, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. So I think that, it's pretty obvious that the vaccines are doing that. As far as the other stuff, I really don't know for sure because vaccines are my area of expertise. But as far as the chemtrails and the other things, it's quite possible. I mean, genes can be very altered quite easily. A good example of that, have you ever heard of the Dutch hunger winter?
No.
This is to give people an idea of how easily genetics are changed. Well, after World War II, there was a starvation in Holland, and and during the winter, they were basically starved out. They had to give up all their food to the Nazis. And so the people who were pregnant, the women who were pregnant in their third trimester during this starvation winter, their babies were, 10 times more likely to have problems with obesity and type 2 diabetes. And so they figured that the reason is because they had gotten so used to holding on to every nutrient that they could receive through having to be, through their mother being pregnant during this starvation time, that it changed, but it changed that quickly. So that just kind of shows you how quickly these genetic alterations can happen. That happened not even in a full generation.
Wow. And
so,
when we look at now the studies that say that 50% of all children could potentially be autistic by 2025, was that the date? Yeah.
I think, I think you're right, 50%.
I mean, how is that even possible? I mean, there's got to be some major poison. This isn't happening by itself.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, exactly. And it's, I think these things work together in synergy. So because what the MIT professor or the scientist who brought that up was talking about the glyphosate in the Ready Roundup, the Monsanto pesticide. But these things work together with the vaccine. So once you've already been vaccinated and then you come into contact with something like glyphosate, and I mean, back to the dog thing, we've known for a while that those were killing dogs who were, eating or chewing on the lawns that had been sprayed with glyphosate. Mm-hmm. And it was killing and causing them to have just cancers and all kinds of problems. So the children going out there and playing outside in their glyphosate lawn, ready Roundup all over the place, or the parks and such, and they've already been vaccinated, sometimes that can trigger a reaction that you maybe didn't notice before. They might have been vaccine injured, but it wasn't obvious. And then as soon as they come into contact with something like glyphosate, or sometimes these prescription drugs, it's just out of control right now.
And it puts the immune system into a tailspin is basically what it's causing. I mean, it's causing a breakdown. Glyphosate, the one thing that I was looking into with Dr. Huber, he talks about how it's such a potent antibiotic, and it kills all the beneficial gut bacteria as well as the beneficial bacteria in the soil. I mean, how insane is that?
Right.
But then they start talking about how we have all this antibiotic resistance and superbugs everywhere. Well, what do you think caused that? It wasn't necessarily the doctors overprescribing antibiotics, which they did, or farmers injecting animals with antibiotics, which they did. But I can't, there's no way that you can tell me that spraying all this weed killer that apparently kills all the beneficial bacteria isn't going to cause some sort of antibiotic resistant and superbugs.
People's gut floras are just a wasteland these days. I mean, we don't have the bacteria that we need in order to survive. I read this article. There was a comparison done from the Americans' amount of gut flora that we had to the people of Papua New Guinea, and they had such a vast array of all of these bacteria in their guts, and we had like 2 or 3. I mean, we were just so vacant because there's been this war against bacteria all these years in medical science, it's going to kill you, it's going to kill you. But it's bad bacteria that fights good bacteria. It's this whole bacteria war. If you don't have one, then the other is going to wreak havoc on you. So, but the people of Papua New Guinea had this, and they did have illnesses, but they had their diet was pretty basic. They ate like plantains and, a few different types of meats and so on and so forth. But it's just very obvious that we've been changed to no longer produce these bacteria and to no longer have them in our gut that actually help us fight disease.
Exactly. And I think that's the point, because then we stay sick and they make all kinds of money.
Right. We stay sick, we stay patients, we stay, buying customers of their, this, that, and the other in order to try and cure ourselves from the disease that they created. But then we just continue this cycle of sickness. Because if you go down those roads, you go down to the prescriptions, you go down to the, the chemotherapies and this and that, it's just, you're going to continue to be a paying customer. You're going to end up in the hospital, and if you survive at all.
Exactly. Well, April, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me this morning. And,
you bet.
So I guess it'll be interesting. We got to keep our eye on this anthrax debacle and see what happens.
We'll see how this whole thing unfolds, and, we'll be keeping our eyes out. So.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
All right, guys. I think that's it.
Hold on one second.
So pretty awesome. There we go. Pretty awesome conversation. That was the first time I ever had April on, and I enjoyed it greatly. It's fun to have guests, number one, but it's even more fun to have guests who are hosts who have their whole own topic that they spend their dedicated time focusing on, and just such a font of knowledge. So one last thing I want to touch on here before we finish up is a story that I found out of, and hold on one second, I got to find it, phys.org, titled Self-Replicating Nanostructures Made from DNA. Yes, this was from May 28th of 2015, yesterday. Is it possible to engineer self-replicating nanomaterial? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we were talking about the genetically modified vaccinations as well as food. One of our other topics that we've touched on quite a bit is nanotechnology in food. And I'm telling you, there is the same technology that now is being used across both vaccines, quote unquote vaccines, or they're calling them immuno something or other. So they're not even really calling them vaccinations anymore in these newfangled, but they're also using the same exact technologies. And we saw that looking at the 2014 Monsanto forward-looking yearly statement that was already funds were on the plate there for them to start developing that. And they were going to be using RNAi as a vehicle in the plants. So when the bugs ate the plants, it would physically go into... And there we go. All right, guys, everyone have an awesome Friday. Make sure you